This week I'm back with some new Linux news, including information about Linux drivers implementing HDMI 2.1, new features in NTFS Plus, an announcement from Ubuntu, KDE Plasma becoming Wayland exclusive, a new Office suite available on Linux that's enterprise grade, and a Linux laptop vendor giving up on ARM processors. We're going to get into all of this and more today. There's a lot to cover, so let's jump in with Xilinx, or the Linux XLNX project, which is the official Linux kernel from Xilinx, has had an interesting contribution as AMD's main open source AMD GPU Linux driver still cannot implement HDMI 2.1. And why is that the case? That's because the HDMI forum forbids open source implementations of HDMI 2.1 in parts of the spec unless you pay for the license and keep components closed. But it's interesting as we see a different division of AMD Xilinx seems to have partial HDMI 2.1 support for its own Linux driver. So this does not mean that AMD GPU is going to get HDMI 2.1 soon, as it's different hardware with different rules, but it does highlight a major conflict between HDMI forums, licensing, and how it blocks fully open source HDMI 2.1 support on Linux. As in part of the Xilinx code under HDMI-C, we can see an implementation of the configuration structure for enabling HDMI 2.1 configuration support. And this really exposes the fragmentation inside of AMD, as we've been long awaiting enabling HDMI 2.1 support so that Linux can get proper support of HDMI, or Linux users aren't going to probably see a true open source HDMI 2.1 unless AMD moves to more HDMI 2.1 control into firmware like NVIDIA does, or the HDMI forum relaxes its licensing rules, which is very unlikely. But more and more, this struggle is actually being covered by DisplayPort, or DP, as it becomes even more dominant than it already has over HDMI, and is a big reason why users want to use DisplayPort, because it's way better for open source than HDMI is because of this licensing, and who controls the standard, as DisplayPort costs $0 to implement and there's no per device fees. DisplayPort is controlled by VESA, which is an open friendly company, as they are pro open source. There's supportive documentation available and it cooperates with Linux kernel developers. The HDMI forum, on the other hand, is extremely protective of its IP, has restrictive training on signaling, and is interesting because it's a little while that we still have struggling HDMI 2.1 support after it's been out for over 8 years. It's pretty much ancient technology at this point. We'll see how things transpire. Maybe there are pushes in the background with AMD to try to get HDMI 2.1 support over to Linux. Anyways, let's move on to the glibc. The core C library used by almost all Linux systems just got a massive speed boost for the FMA math instruction, which is the fuse, multiply, add. It is now up to 2.9 times faster on AMD Zen 3 processor, thanks to a new implementation borrowed from the Musel libc library, which has been heavily optimized. And we can see the improvement across x86-64 architecture, showing the 12.9 times improvement. For those of you unaware, of course, faster math leads to a lot of other components being faster, as glibc is the foundational library for nearly all Linux programs. That means we can get faster scientific and engineering applications, machine learning workloads, media encodings, physics engines, games, so on and so forth. And it is a huge win for AMD CPUs on Linux, as AMD Zen chips, Zen 3 and 4, massively benefit because the old implementation was forcing expensive operations, and this new implementation avoids that. It's always cool to see performance optimizations, and not just optimizations to make things faster. The functions are now more precise and standard compliant. It's pretty cool to see, as this is a part of a bigger math overhaul in glibc version 2.43. There's many improvements to core math functions, and hopefully Linux systems will see a broad performance and accuracy upgrade across the entire math library on specific architectures. Awesome news coming to AMD users as we keep seeing updated performance-based glibc patches. In a completely different announcement, the XORG display server has fixed multiple regressions caused by earlier backported changes. These issues affected NVIDIA users and AMD GPU users, which could even have caused reduced performance on AMD GPUs. Namely, this new release mostly reverts bad patch changes. The release announcement here says the changes being reverted here are part of a series of changes previously backported in the stable branch, yet these are not actual fixes to address bugs found in the stable branch, while those changes introduce regressions with reverse prime with NVIDIA closed source driver, issues with 10-bit output with the AMD GPU driver, and reduced performance on AMD GPU driver. So this is a big change. For those of you using X11 still and the XORG display server, it'll be great to upgrade to 21.1.21 as it fixes several GPU related regressions. Here's an interesting one. The Collabora Office Suite just dropped with official support for Linux. Look at that. Collabora Online now on desktop. They said they were excited to share the first release of new Collabora Office for desktop, bringing the familiar, powerful Collabora Online experience to run locally on Windows, Mac OS, and yes, good old Linux, which is exciting. As for those of you unaware, Collabora Office is a fully open source Office suite based on LibreOffice, but packaged and supported by Collabora, a company that specializes in enterprise-grade level Office solutions. So this is really cool, as a professional enterprise supported version of LibreOffice is now available for Linux users, and is a signal that more and more companies are invested in Linux. As we've been seeing in the previous few weeks with Valve's announcements of new hardware, we're getting more and more software as well. For decades, Microsoft Office compatibility has been one of the main blockers for Linux desktop adoption. Now with Collabora, we will hopefully see a heavy investment in better DocX and Excel and PowerPoint compatibility with more accurate rendering on Linux. And yes, I was able to install it myself. It is a Flatpak, which you have to install, but I have it here running in the background. Let's just launch it here. Yeah, close without saving. I got 2 of these. Notice I've installed it again via Flatpak. I did Flatpak install, and I got this from online by clicking the Tux logo, the little penguin, and actually downloading as a Flatpak to my downloads folder and just installing. After that, I'm able to launch Collabora Office Suite. There it is, Collabora Office. And it's very much like you would expect it to look like LibreOffice. And we can also click new and just get a blank spreadsheet if we want to do the Excel version as well. But the number one reason people are going to choose Collabora would be that they need better Microsoft Office compatibility, really a more accurate layout fidelity for things like DocX or XLS, X formats, as we clearly have good support for exporting into those types of formats. We also get access to a cloud editor called Collabora Online. So the files don't just have to exist here locally on the computer. You can use Collabora Online and have access to your documents anywhere you go through the cloud. We'll see how this professionally supported Office Suite ends up working on Linux. I am glad to see that I was able to make it run right out of the box on Ubuntu 24.04. Although LibreOffice gets the job done for the most part for me, it is cool to see that cloud save capability available with this professional suite. Now moving on to some not so great news. Tuxedo Computers, a Linux first laptop and desktop brand known for making powerful and Linux native computers, announced last year that they would be bringing Linux to ARM, as the announcement was called Tuxedo on ARM is coming. And the announcement was that Tuxedo would try to bring Linux native ARM laptops using Qualcomm's Snapdragon X Elite chip. And it would be the first serious ARM notebook designed for Linux, marking a major milestone for Linux hardware and open source ARM support. But with this announcement over a year ago now, we are now seeing a new announcement called the discontinuation of ARM notebook with Snapdragon X Elite system on chip. This means Tuxedo has stopped development of its Linux ARM laptop using Qualcomm's Snapdragon X1 Elite chip because the hardware did not work well with Linux. Poor battery life, missing drivers, no KVM virtualization support, no proper fan control, a weak USB 4 support, and limited video acceleration all added up to Tuxedo Computers dropping support for a project that they initially announced over a year ago. They are going to contribute their Linux work like the device trees to upstream so that the community still benefits from some of the development over the last year or so. And this does suck for Linux, as Linux finally had a shot at a real ARM laptop and it doesn't seem like it's coming to fruition. For many years, Linux users have always wanted Apple-like battery life, ARM efficiency, and a lightweight, quiet, long-lasting laptop that doesn't get hot or requires an internal fan. And that's what these ARM-based processors really bring to the table, as it looks like Qualcomm tried to promise Linux support and clearly has underdelivered and is of course annoying. But isn't the only annoying thing, as Arduino, now owned by Qualcomm, quietly introduced a new terms of service and privacy policy that massively expanded what seems to be corporate control. And in a post on LinkedIn from Adafruit Industries, which is one of the most influential and beloved companies in the maker electronics world. They design, manufacture, and publish open source electronics tutorials and are generally used by hobbyists in hardware dev. So in this post, they have broken down what happened. So let's read here. Qualcomm-owned Arduino quietly pushed a sweeping rewrite of its terms of service and privacy policy, and the changes mark a clear break from the open hardware ethos that built the platform. The new documents introduce irrevocable, perpetual license over anything users upload, broad surveillance style monitoring of AI features, a clause preventing users from identifying potential patent infringement, years-long retention of usernames even after account deletion, and the integration of all user data, including minors, into Qualcomm's global data ecosystem, military weird things, and more. Several sections effectively reshape Arduino from an open source platform into a tightly controlled corporate service with deep data extraction built in. The most striking addition: users are now explicitly forbidden from reverse engineering or even attempting to understand how the platform works unless Arduino gives permission. That's a profound shift from a brand long embraced by educators, makers, researchers, and open source advocates. With the cloud having a rough day and many systems offline yesterday, anyone invested in transparency, community governance, or data rights should read these documents closely. All leading to the post of this death of the Arduino cover, as Arduino's new Qualcomm-driven terms turn the platform from open source and community-driven to what seems to be a data harvesting ecosystem with strict usage rules. This is bad for everyone: open hardware, open source, and education. It'll be interesting to see what happens and if this is the true death of Arduino. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below, as this has been blowing up with over 2,100 likes already on LinkedIn and 261 comments. Should we do a deep dive into this and what actually has happened? I'll definitely be following this along. And if you like following along with news segments like this, make sure to subscribe below and smash that like button on the way back up. We'll continue on with the news as there is even more to share. In this week's desktop news, we're seeing a new GNOME shell extension called Copious, which has just been released, offering a powerful clipboard manager for GNOME. Now, this is a third-party shell extension, but it's really cool and exciting to see, as GNOME finally gets a modern, feature-rich clipboard manager and supports text, code, images, files, links, characters, and colors, can be opened at a mouse pointer or text cursor. You can pin favorite items, group items with 9 colored tags, have customizable clipboard actions, and here's what things can look like with the extension. We do see a few other improvements as well, as Newsflash 4.2 is released with new quick access font spacing controls, tablet layout improvements, and better handling of multiple images. In the carousel, Plantify 4.16.1 is now available. It's a third-party task manager with a UI that's polished, and now you can shift enter to keep adding tasks. Zoom links are supported, and they have a new website redesign. And finally, the Digital Wellbeing Project sees an update as this week in parental controls. Ignacy is working on changing the shell lock screen to show when a child's screen time limit has been reached, and I've spent a bit of time writing up technical details on how web filtering will work. Anyways, always great to see as GNOME continues to evolve the Linux desktop experience. But now let's move on to the other big desktop environment on the block, as KDE makes a massive announcement called Going All In on a Wayland Future. KDE has now announced that starting with Plasma 6.8, the desktop environment will only have Wayland featured, and the traditional X11 session will be removed. That means now X11 applications will still run through X-Wayland, but users will no longer be able to log into a native X11 Plasma session. That means that Plasma 6.7 will be the last version to fully support X11, with fixes lasting into early 2027. Well, folks, it's the beginning of a new era. After nearly 3 decades of KDE desktop environments running on X11, the future KDE Plasma 6.8 release, again, this is going to be early 2027, will be Wayland exclusive. Support for X11 applications will be fully entrusted to X-Wayland, and the Plasma X11 session will no longer be included. That's a big deal, as there's many questions by users. Plasma 6.8 means that the X11 session will be supported by KDE until, they say, early 2027. What if I still really need X11? Well, you can use long-term support distributions that ship with older versions of Plasma. Will X11 applications still work outside of special cases? Yes, with X-Wayland, the compatibility layer will help you run most of those X11 applications still through X-Wayland. Does X11 forwarding still work? Yes, X-Wayland supports it. Can I still run KDE applications on X11? Yes. There are no plans to drop X11 support in KDE applications outside of Plasma. What about gaming? They claim that gaming runs better on Wayland anyway. What about NVIDIA GPUs? While Wayland support in proprietary NVIDIA drivers was quite rocky a few years ago, it has matured and is working very well on NVIDIA is the claim. And the bottom line is this is happening because we believe that eventually dropping Plasma X11 session will allow us to move faster to improve stability and functionality for the majority of our users who are already using Wayland. This is a big move as KDE Plasma 6.8 will drop X11 sessions completely, go to Wayland only mode, and it makes a lot of sense, but we are still missing a few things as screen recording and screen sharing can suck on Wayland, and the remote desktop protocol is still inconsistent as it works flawlessly under things like VNC and X forwarding over SSH on X11, but Wayland requires stricter access and not quite as universal as X11. The color management protocol, although it's made a lot of headway over the last year in at least HDR, it still is very new. But one of the biggest remaining gaps between the two is that Wayland is still missing accessibility as it is harder. Things like screen readers, magnifiers, on-screen keyboards, and other assistive tools are lacking support and still lag behind X11. Anyways, it's still a big deal for KDE and Plasma users as we're going to be getting a Wayland exclusive KDE Plasma experience, and KDE is definitely signaling that they want to simplify the Linux desktop experience for users with modern graphics features, improved performance. We'll see how this all pans out. Let me know what you think about KDE dropping X11 entirely in the comments section. And if you're ready to level up your Linux experience, check out my checklist, cheat sheet, and mind map, all available at SavvyNik.com. Get them today. And now we're seeing a major color pipeline implemented, which has been funded by Valve as they've been winning for the last couple weeks with all sorts of new announcements and partnerships. They have developed this in part with Igalia on AMD and what's a commit for the Direct Rendering Manager, an API that is essential for proper HDR and advanced color management as a modern display pipeline for AMD gets merged and is likely to land in Linux 7.0, bringing full next generation color handling to AMD GPUs and hopefully others later. We're seeing a lot of those commits come in directly. And the final patch series outlines what exactly is being worked on, but here are some of the things, including correct EOTF and OETF curves, PQ HDR support, BT color profiles, including 2020 and 709. 1D and 3D loots are available, which is the color transformation table, full color transformation matrices, and other pipelines all being introduced. With this latest patch series, Linux is finally getting a proper modern HDR plus color management pipeline at the kernel level. Thanks to Valve, AMD, and Igalia for working on this. This is going to massively improve gaming desktops, and if you're wondering why, well, I bet you it has a lot to do with the Steam machine. Clearly, they're working on this for themselves as they got to bring this all in for their brand new gaming PC that they're going to be offering in 2026 somewhere at the start, and shows you a constant commitment from Valve to the Linux ecosystem. Clearly the Steam Deck and Steam Machine are in mind here as they want full color management with correct HDR curves, LUT support, and gamut mapping. I imagine this is a driving factor for them committing these efforts to Linux, and once it's merged and adopted, others should follow as well. So in order for example, if NVIDIA wants to stay on parity with AMD on Linux, well, it's going to have to push its own code as well. This is a very big win for Linux gaming and multimedia, as again, this patch series should land with kernel 6.7, which right now would be officially released around the January 7, 2024 time period, which is interesting because all the new hardware has been announced to be released somewhere early next year. We'll be following along with new developments. But now I want to take a moment to talk about NTFSPlus, a modern, high-performance read-write NTFS driver for Linux that has been receiving a major overhaul in its version 2 update. And I get into what exactly NTFSPlus is and how they are creating the next-gen Linux NTFS driver, which is rapidly gaining features. I won't get into that here in this segment, but if you want to check out that video and you're interested in NTFSPlus, I will post a link to my other video, which dives in a lot deeper into this wonderful driver. But anyways, let's talk about what this massive version 2 update brings to the table. It brings in things like the Microsoft file extension. The master file table is the core base of NTFS that stores info about every file. And now we're supporting its file extension feature, which means the driver can handle more advanced NTFS metadata correctly. We also see FI trim, which is the SSD discard or trim feature, a command that tells SSDs which blocks are no longer in use. We also have more compatible NTFS 3 mount options, like handling hidden files and case insensitivity. We also see NTFS 3 compatible file attributes with Windows style flags, better character set handling, new documentation, and things are improving very fast, including performance enhancements when you compare it to the NTFS 3 driver on Linux versus the NTFS Plus driver that we're talking about here. Anyways, all great news coming from NTFS Plus, as this benefits a lot of users who use NTFS access from Linux, and that's for millions of Windows users, including those who dual boot, plug NTFS external drives into Linux devices, use NAS systems or servers that mount as NTFS. So overall, better performance for both Linux and Windows users who use NTFS drives. And that's where we'll end it today, as it's been another massive week for Linux and open source news. We're seeing KDE commit to Wayland only, watching the desktop get cleaner, more secure, and performant, new drivers coming in, and Linux just getting better and better. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in 2026, as there's a lot of potential. I'm thinking about making a prediction video for 2026. If you want to see that, post it in the comment section below. There's a lot I want to talk about in how Linux has improved, not only over the last year, but the future of Linux coming up and what exciting things we're about to see drop. As the Linux desktop is becoming more and more popular, it is exciting to see with major influencers finally coming over to our side. Thanks for sticking around to the end. You're a true fan. Don't forget to subscribe below and smash that like button on the way back up. Catch me in a great community on Discord, and I'll catch you in another video. Thanks for watching.